Okay, so we're going to read chapter 11 now. As you remember, we ended chapter 10 with Jonas beginning to receive his very first memory as the receiver of memories. So we're going to see how it goes in chapter 11. I'm just going to warn you, I'm doing the recording right now in my kitchen with my 4 cats. So if there is a meow during the reading, it's not part of the community, it's just part of my kitchen. Okay, here we go. Chapter 11. Jonas felt nothing unusual at first. He felt only the light touch of the old man's hands on his back. He tried to relax, to breathe evenly. The room was absolutely silent, and for a moment Jonas feared that he might disgrace himself now, on the first day of his training, by falling asleep. Then he shivered. He realized that the touch of his hands felt suddenly cold. At the same instant, breathing in, he felt the air change, and his very breath was cold. He licked his lips, and in doing so, his tongue touched the suddenly chilled air. It was very startling, but he was not frightened at all now. He was filled with energy, and he breathed again, feeling the sharp intake of frigid air. Now, too, he could feel cold air swirling around his entire body. He felt it blow against his hands and where they lay at his side and over his back. The touch of the man's hands seemed to have disappeared. Now he became aware of an entirely new sensation, pinpricks. No, because they were soft and without pain. Tiny, cold, feather-like feelings peppered his body and face. He put out his tongue again and caught one of the dots of cold upon it. It disappeared from his awareness instantly, but he caught another, and the sensation made him smile. One part of his consciousness knew that he was still lying there on the bed in the annex room, yet another separate part of his being was upright now in a sitting position, and beneath him he could feel that he was not on soft decorated bed covering at all, but rather seated on a flat, hard surface. His hands now held, though at the same time they were still motionless at his side, a rough, damp rope. And he could see, though his eyes were closed, he could see a bright whirling torrent of crystals in the air around him, and he could see the gather on the backs of his hands like cold fur. His breath was visible. Beyond, though, through the swirls of what he now somehow perceived was the thing the old man had spoken of, snow, he could look out and down at a great distance. He was up high someplace. The ground was thick with the furry snow, but he sat slightly above it on a hard, flat object. Sled, he knew abruptly. He was sitting on a thing called Sled, and the sled itself seemed to be poised at the top of a long, extended mound that rose from the very flat land where he was. Even as though the word mound, his new consciousness told him, hill. Then the sled, with Jonas upon it, began to move through the snowfall, and he understood instantly that now he was going downhill. No voice made an explanation. The experience explained itself to him. His face cut through the frigid air as he began to descend, moving through the substance called snow on the vehicle called sled, which propelled him on what he now knew without a doubt to be runners. Comprehending all of those things as he sped downward, he was free to enjoy the breathless glee that overwhelmed him. The speed, the clear, cold air, the total silence, the feeling of balance and excitement and peace. Then, as the angle of incline lessened and the mound, the hill, flattened nearing the bottom, the sled's forward motion slowed, and the snow was piled around it, and he pushed with his body, moving it forward, not wanting the exhilarating ride to end. Finally, the obstruction of piled snow was too much for the thin runners of the sled, and he came to a stop. He sat there for a moment, panting, holding the rope in his cold hands. Tentatively he opened his eyes, not his snow-hill eyes, for they had been open throughout the strange ride. He opened his ordinary eyes and saw that he was still on the bed, and they had not moved at all. The old man, still beside the bed, was watching him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Jonas sat up and tried to answer honestly. "Surprised," he said after a moment. The old man wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Phew," he said, "it was exhausting, but even transmitting that tiny memory to you, I think it lightened me just a little." "Do you mean—" You did say I could ask questions. The man nodded, encouraging his question. "Do you mean that you don't have that memory of it? Of that ride on the sled anymore?" "That's right. A little weight off this old body." "Oh, but it was such fun, and now you don't have it anymore. I took it from you." But the old man laughed. "All I gave you was one ride on one sled in one snow on one hill. I have a whole world of them in my memory. I could give them to you one by one 1,000 times, and there still would be more." "Are you saying that, we could do it again?" Jonas asked. "I'd really like to. I think I could steer by pulling the ropes. I didn't do it this time because it was so new." The old man, laughing, shook his head. "Maybe another day, for a treat. But there's no time, really, just to play. I only wanted to begin by showing you how it works." Now, he said, turning businesslike, lie back down. I want to. Well, Jonas did. He was eager for whatever experience would come next. But he had suddenly so many questions. Why don't we have snow and sleds and hills, he asked. And when did we? In the past, did my parents have sleds when they were young? Did you? The old man shrugged and gave a short laugh. No, he told Jonas, it's a very distant memory. That's why it was so exhausting. I had to tug it forward from many generations back, and it was given to me when I was a new receiver, and the previous receiver had to pull it through a long period also. But what happened to those things? Snow and the rest of it? Well, climate control. Snow made growing food difficult, limited the agricultural periods, and unpredictable weather made transportation almost impossible at times. It wasn't a practical thing, so it became obsolete when we went to sameness. And the hills, too, he added. They made conveyance of goods unwielding. Trucks, buses slowed them down. So he waved his hands as a gesture and caused hills to disappear. Sameness, he concluded. Jonas frowned. I wish we still had those things still, just now and then. The old man smiled. So do I. But the choice is not ours. But, sir, Jonas suggested, you have so much power. The man corrected him. Honor, he said firmly. I have great honor, and so will you. But you will find that this is not the same as power. Lie quietly now, since we've entered the topic of climate. Let me give you something else. But this time I'm not going to tell you the name of it, because I want to test to see how you are receiving. You should be able to perceive the name without being told. I gave away snow and sled and downhill and runners by telling them to you in advance. Without being instructed, Jonas closed his eyes again. He felt the hands on his back again, and he waited. Now it came more quickly, the feelings. This time the hands didn't become cold, but instead they began to feel warm on his body. They moistened a little. The warmth spread, extending across his shoulders, up his neck, onto the side of his face. He could feel it through his clothed parts, too, a pleasant, all-over sensation, and when he licked his lips this time, the air was hot and heavy. He didn't move. There was no sled. His posture didn't change. He was simply alone someplace out of doors, lying down, and the warmth came from far above. It was not as exciting as the ride through the snowy air, but it was pleasurable and comforting. Suddenly he perceived the word for it, sunshine. He perceived that it came from the sky, and then it ended. Sunshine, he said aloud, opening his eyes. Good, you did get the word. That makes my job easier, not so much explaining. And it came from the sky. That's right, the old man said, just the way it used to. Before sameness, before climate control, Jonas added. The man laughed. You receive well, and you learn quickly. I'm very pleased with you, but that's enough for today. I think we're off to a good start. There was a question bothering Jonas. Sir, he said, the chief elder told me, she told everyone, and you told me too, that it would be painful. So I was a little scared, but it didn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed it. He looked quizzically at the old man. The man sighed. I started you with the memory of pleasure. My previous failure gave me the wisdom to do that. He took a few deep breaths. Jonas, he said, it will be painful, but it need not be painful yet. I'm brave. I really am. Jonas sat up a little straighter. The old man looked at him for a moment. He smiled. I can see that, he said. Well, since you asked the question, I think I have enough energy for one more transmission. Lie down once more. This will be the last one today. Jonas obeyed cheerfully. He closed his eyes, waiting, and he felt the hands again, and he felt the warmth again, the sunshine again, coming from the sky of this other consciousness that was so new to him. This time, as he lay basking in the wonderful warmth, he felt the passage of time. His real self was aware that it was only a minute or two, but his other memory-receiving self felt hours pass in the sun. His skin began to sting. Restlessly, he moved one arm, bending it, and it felt sharp pain in the crease of the inner arm at the elbow. Ouch, he said loudly, and shifted on the bed. Ow, he said, wincing at the shift, and even moving his mouth to speak made his face hurt. He knew there was a word, but the pain kept him from grasping it. Then it ended, and he opened his eyes, wincing in discomfort. It hurt, he told the old man. I couldn't get the word for it. It was sunburn, the old man told him. Oh, it hurts a lot, Jonas said. I'm glad you gave it to me. It was interesting, and now I understand better what it meant, that there would be pain. The man didn't respond. He sat silently for a second, and finally said, Get up now. It's time for you to go home. They both walked to the center of the room, and Jonas put his tunic back on. Goodbye, sir, he said. Thank you for my first day. The old man nodded to him. He looked drained and a little sad. Sir, Jonas said shyly. Yes, do you have a question? It's just that I don't know your name. I thought you were the receiver, but now you say that I'm the receiver, so I don't know what to call you. The man had sat back down in the comfortable upholstered chair. He moved his shoulders around as if to ease away some aching sensation. He seemed terribly weary. Call me the giver, he told Jonas. And that's the end of chapter 11. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 11. Now let's have a look at the chapter 11 summary. So Jonas waits for the memory of snow, and all of a sudden he's very cold. He can no longer feel the man's hands on his back. He feels something like pinpricks on his skin, but then he decides that it's really not that because it's not painful. He starts to catch the snowflakes with his tongue and he starts to experience the feeling. Part of him he feels is still lying on the bed in the annex, but the other part is somewhere else, sitting on a hard surface with a rope in his hands. All of a sudden he knows he's surrounded by snow and that he's sitting on a sled and he's racing downhill fast at first, but then the snow piles up and the runners come to a standstill. Then when he opens his eyes, he's back in the room. The old man says that was really tiring for him, but that he feels lightened because he gave away one memory. And Jonas asks if that means that the old man doesn't have that particular memory anymore. And the receiver admits that yes, it's true, but he has thousands of memories just like it, so he's not going to miss it. Jonas wants to know why they don't have things like that anymore, snow or sleds or runners or anything. But the old man explains that this is very, very old memory that's been passed through generations of receivers. And the reason that they don't have snow anymore is because of climate control and sameness. Whether the weather wasn't conducive to growing crops and essentially eliminated when they said they went to sameness. The old man decides that they are done for the day, but before he goes, Jonas asks why the chief elder talked about the job being painful. The old man explains that it will be painful, but that his previous failures taught him to start with pleasant memories first. But as he's leaving, Jonas says he's not sure what to call the old man. And then he does tell Jonas at the end that he's the receiver and that he should be calling him the giver now. So he goes home having experienced snow and sunshine and sunburn. So that was quite of an interesting chapter. So let's read chapter 12 now to see what happens next. Okay, so as we remember in chapter 11, Jonas received his very first memories. He received the memory of snow and sledding, and then he received the memory of sunshine, and then finally getting a sunburn. And then we also learned at the end of the chapter that now the giver is called the giver, and he is now the receiver. So let's read chapter 12 now. You slept soundly, Jonas? His mother asked at the morning meal. No dreams? Jonas simply smiled and nodded, not ready to lie, not willing to tell the truth. I slept very soundly, he said. I wish this one would, his father said, leaning down from his chair to touch Gabriel's waving fist. The basket was on the floor beside him. In its corner, beside Gabriel's head, the stuffed hippo was staring with his blank eyes. So do I, Mother said, rolling her eyes. He's so fretful at night. Jonas had not heard the new child during the night because, as always, he had slept soundly. But it was not true that he had no dreams. Again and again, as he slept, he had slid down that snow-covered hill. Always in the dream it seemed as if there were a destination, a something, he could not grasp what, that lay beyond the place where the thickness of snow brought the sled to a stop. He was left, upon awakening, with the feeling that he wanted, even somehow needed, to reach the something that waited in the distance, the feeling that it was good, that it was welcoming, that it was significant. But he did not know how to get there. He tried to shed the leftover dream, gathering his schoolwork and preparing for the day. School seemed a little different today. The classes were the same: language and communications, commerce and industry, science and technology, civil procedures and government. But during the breaks for recreation periods and his midday meal, the other new 12s were abuzz with descriptions of their first day of training. All of them talked at once, interrupting each other, hastily making the required apology for interrupting, then forgetting again in the excitement of describing the new experiences. Jonas listened. He was well aware of his own admonitions not to discuss his training. But it would have been impossible anyway. There was no way to describe to his friends what he had experienced there in the annex room. How could he describe a sled without describing a hill and snow? And how could you describe a hill and snow to someone who'd never felt height or wind or that feathery magical cold? Even trained for years as they had all been in precision of language, what word would you use to give another the experience of sunshine? So it was easy for Jonas to be still and to be silent. And after school hours, he rode again beside Fiona to the house of the old. I looked for you yesterday, she told him, so we could ride home together. Your bike was still there, and I waited a little while, but it was getting late, so I went home. I apologize for making you wait, Jonas said. I accept your apologies, he replied automatically. I stayed a little longer than I expected, Jonas explained. She pedaled forward silently, and he knew that she expected him to tell her why. She expected him to describe his first day of training, but to ask would have been fallen in the category of rudeness. You've been doing so many volunteer hours with the old. There won't be much that you don't already know. Oh, there's lots to learn. There's administrative work and the dietary rules and punishment for disobedience. Did you know that they use a discipline wand on the old the same as they do for small children? And there's occupational therapy and recreational activities and medications, and they reach the building and break their bikes. I really think I'll like it better than school, Fiona confessed. Me too, Jonas agreed, wheeling his bike into its place. She waited for a second as if, again, she expected him to go on. Then she looked at her watch, waved, and hurried towards the entrance. Jonas stood for a moment beside his bike, startled. It had happened again, the thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time it had been Fiona who had undergone the fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and towards her going through the door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair, and just for that flickering instant. He ran through it in his mind. It was clearly beginning to happen more often. First the apple, a few weeks before. The next time it had happened in the faces in the audience of the auditorium, just 2 days ago, and now today, Fiona's hair. Frowning, Jonas walked towards the annex. I will ask the giver, he decided. The old man looked up, smiling, when Jonas entered the room. He was already seated at the bed, and he seemed more energetic today, slightly renewed and glad to see Jonas. Welcome, he said. We must get started. You're 1 minute late. I apologize, Jonas began, and then stopped, flustered, remembering there was to be no apologies. He removed his tunic and went to the bed. I'm 1 minute late because something happened, he explained, and I'd like to ask you about it if you don't mind. You may ask me anything. Jonas tried to sort it out in his mind as if he could explain it clearly. I think it's what you call seeing beyond, he said. The giver nodded. Describe it, he said. Jonas told him about the experience with the apple, and then the moment on the stage, and he had looked out and seen the same phenomenon on the faces of the crowds. Then today, just now, outside, it happened with my friend Fiona. She herself didn't change exactly, but something about her changed for a second. Her hair looked different, but not in its shape, not in its length. I can't quite... Jonas paused, frustrated by his inability to grasp and describe exactly what had occurred. Finally, he simply said, It changed. I don't know how or why. That's why I was 1 minute late, he concluded, and looked questioningly at the giver. To his surprise, the old man asked him a question which seemed unrelated to the seeing beyond. When I gave you the memory yesterday, the first one, the ride on the sled, did you look around? Jonas nodded. Yes, he said, but the stuff, I mean the snow, in the air, it was hard to see anything. Did you see the sled? Jonas thought back. No, I only felt it under me. I dreamed of it last night, but I don't remember seeing the sled in my dreams either, just feeling it. The giver seemed to be thinking. When I was observing you before the selection, I perceived that you probably had the capacity, and what you described confirms that. It happened somewhat differently to me. The giver told him, when I was your age, about to become the new receiver, I began to experience it. Though it took a different form. With me it was, well, I won't describe it now, you wouldn't understand it yet. But I think I can guess how it's happening to you. Let me just take a little test to confirm my guess. Lie down. Jonas lay on the bed again with his hands on his sides. He felt comfortable here now. He closed his eyes and waited for the familiar feel of the giver's hands on his back. But it didn't come. Instead, the giver instructed him, call back the memory of the ride on the sled, just the beginning of it, where you're at the top of the hill before the slide starts. And this time, look down at the sled. Jonas was puzzled and he opened his eyes. Excuse me? But don't you have to give me the memory? No, it's your memory now. It's not mine to experience any longer. I gave it away. But how do I call it back? You can remember last year on the year when you were 7 or 5, can't you? Can't you? Of course. Well, it's the same. Everyone in the community has one generation memories like those, but you will now be able to go back farther. Just try. Just concentrate. Jonas closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath and sought the sled and the hill and the snow in his consciousness. There they were, with no effort. He was again sitting in that whirling world of snowflakes atop the hill. Jonas grinned with delight and blew his own steamy breath into view. Then, as he had been instructed, he looked down. He saw his own hands furred again with snow. Holding the rope, he saw his legs and moved them aside for a glimpse on the sled beneath. Dumbfounded, he stared at it. This time it was not fleeting impression. This time the sled had, and continued to have, as he blinked and stared at it again, the same mysterious quality the apple had so briefly, and Fiona's hair. The sled did not change. It simply was, well, whatever that thing was. Jonas opened his eyes and was still on the bed, and the giver watched him curiously. Yes, Jonas said slowly, I saw it in the sled. Let me try one more thing. Look over there, to the bookcase. Do you see the very top row of books, the ones behind the table on the shelf? Jonas sought them with his eyes, and he stared at them, and they changed. But the change was fleeting. It slipped away in an instant. It happened, Jonas said. It happened to the books, but it went away again. I'm right then, the giver said. You're beginning to see the color red. The what? The giver sighed. How to explain this? Once, back in the time of the memories, everything had a shape and size, the way they do now, but they also had a quality called color. There were a lot of colors, and one of them was called red. That's the one you are starting to see. Your friend Fiona has red hair. Quite distinctive, actually. I've noticed it before. When you mentioned Fiona's hair, it was the clue that told me you were probably beginning to see the color red. And the faces of people, the ones I saw at the ceremony. The giver shook his head. No, flesh isn't red, but it has red tones in it. There was a time, actually, you'll see this in the memories later, when flesh had many different colors. There was one before. That was before we went to sameness. Today, flesh is all the same, and when you saw that, what you saw was the red tones. Probably when you see the faces take on color, it wasn't as deep or as vibrant as the apple or your friend's hair. The giver chuckled suddenly. We've never completely mastered sameness. I suppose the genetic scientists are still working hard, trying to get the kinks out. Hair like Fiona's must drive them crazy. Jonas listened, though hard to comprehend. And the sled, he said, it had the same thing, the color red. But it didn't change, giver, it just was. That's because it's a memory from the time when color was. It was so, oh, I wish language were more precise. The red was so beautiful. The giver nodded. It is. Do you see it all the time? I see all of them, all the colors. Will I? Of course. When you receive the memories, you will have the capacity to see beyond. You'll gain wisdom, then along with colors and lots more. Jonas wasn't interested just then in wisdom. It was the colors that fascinated him. Why can't everyone see them? Why did colors disappear? The giver shrugged. Our people made that choice, the choice to go to sameness, before my time, before the previous time, back and back and back. We relished colors when we relinquished sunshine and did away with differences. He thought for a moment. We gained control of many things, but we had to let go of others. Oh, we shouldn't have, Jonas said fiercely. The giver looked startled at the certainty of Jonas's reaction. Then he smiled wryly. You've come very quickly to that conclusion, he said. It took me many years. Maybe your wisdom will come more quickly than mine. He glanced at the wall clock. Lie back down now. We have so much to do. Giver, Jonas asked as he arranged himself again on the bed. How did it happen to you when you were becoming the receiver? You said that the seeing beyond happened to you, but not the same way. The hands came to his back. Another day, the giver said gently. I'll tell you another day. Now we must work, and I've thought of a way to help you with the concept of color. Close your eyes and be still now. I'm going to give you a memory of a rainbow. And that's the end of chapter 12. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 12. So now let's look at the summary of what happened during that chapter. So the next morning at breakfast, Jonas managed to avoid directly lying while not telling his dreams to his parents. The dream involved him sledding down the hill again and again, always about to reach something at the bottom, except he doesn't know what the something is. He knows that it's something good, however, something welcoming. Jonas heads to school, and during lunch, everyone's abuzz with their new assignments and their training. And Jonas realizes that he can't explain his training even if he were allowed to, since no one knows what a sled or a hill or snow is anyway. Then, as he's looking at Fiona, she changes, the same way the apple did that day. It only happens for an instant, and it was just her hair that changed. Jonas comes back from his memory, and the giver has him look up at one of the bookshelves, which immediately changes the way the apple did. So the giver then confirms his diagnosis. You're beginning to see the color red, he tells Jonas. Jonas thinks the color's beautiful, and the giver explains that he'll soon be able to see all the colors. The giver says he'll save the lesson for another day, but then he begins to transmit a memory of a rainbow to him. That's the end of chapter 12. Let's see what happens in chapter 13. So that was the end of chapter 11 and 12. So if you enjoy listening to these stories, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to do more books. The next one I'm going to do is The Outsiders, so hopefully that's a good one, and then also Stargirl. But if you do have any suggestions of books you would like me to read, maybe you're doing them in school, please send me a comment so that I can add them to my list of books that I'm going to read for you. Thanks a lot. Let's go to chapter 13 now. Bye.